When we think of hexagons, we usually think of the hexagon where all six sides are the same, that it has six-fold rotational symmetry in the center. But that's not the only hexagon that's possible when we're folding twist-based tessellations. Today I'm going to talk about the three-fold rotationally symmetric mixed-depth hexagon. And I'll note here that there are other mixed-depth hexagons that have two-fold rotational symmetry, but you'll have to go to Advanced Twist Techniques to learn more about those. So, hi, I'm Madonna Yoder. Welcome back to Gathering Folds. So today we're talking about this mixed depth hexagon, and I call it mixed depth because half of the edges have two grid spacings for the pleat depth and half have one. Usually we just deal with twists with a single grid spacing pleat depth, but throwing in these double depth pleats gets us these interesting shapes. It's like we've stretched the hexagon out, and we get to have different symmetries as a result. So this twist is not six-fold rotationally symmetric, so this position is different from this position, but it's the same as this one and this one. So that means we have three-fold rotational symmetry in our twist with six pleats. So let's see where this can be used, and then we'll jump into folding. I don't have that many examples of folded tessellations using this twist because I've just started using it myself, but there's so many ideas churning in my head. Just last night I came up with a dozen different tilings that use either this twist or other mixed depth twists. So here we have three different twists that are used, and let's see if we can zoom in and see the difference between these open triangle holes. So some of these open triangle holes are the mixed depth hexagon. In those holes, the grid lines on the inside line up with the grid lines on the outside. And that is also the case for half of these holes. But the other half, the grid lines are not lined up with the grid lines outside, and so those are actually very open triangle twists. They're these ones that I've tucked underneath. So here we have a structure with these mixed depth hexagons that has mixed depth hexagon going into a triangle twist with that depth 2, the double depth pleats, and then another twist with depth 1. So we have three twists. We've got the mixed depth hexagon, the double depth triangle, and the single depth triangle. So that's what's going on with this structure. We're going to fold a different tessellation using the same structure. And one of the reasons for folding the other tessellation is because more of it will fit. You'll get more pattern repeats for a given amount of grid. And the other reason is that the other tessellation is actually aligned with the grid parallel to the edge of the paper, which is the more standard way of folding the grid. So let's dive in and start folding these twists. I've got a 32-fold triangle grid on a hexagon, by the way, and I do recommend watching through once before attempting to fold on your own. So let's take a look at the crease pattern. Here we've got a pattern on top of the crease pattern that I call the skeleton, that is showing the characteristic shape of a hexagons and triangles six-fold tiling. That means that each hexagon is surrounded by 6 triangles, and each triangle is surrounded by 3 hexagons. And that gets us this rhombus star pattern on top of the tiling when you put dots in the center of each twist and connect the dots where the twists are connected by pleats. So removing that and zooming in, we're going to be looking at our mixed depth twist. And this one has valley folds around the edges of the twist, but we don't fold things so that they form valley folds. We fold from the other side of the paper. So I'm going to flip my paper over to whatever side I consider back, and we'll start folding this twist. Now we have our handy dandy reference twist as a guide, so we can see this from the front side as well. Now the thing to keep in mind here is that when I'm doing my twist, I can either fold right-handedly or left-handedly. And in the case of this tessellation, this crease pattern, I have it set up so that the hexagon twist is right-handed. That means that when my thumb is up in the center and I put my fingers out along the mountains and I curl my fingers with my right hand, then my fingers hit the corresponding valley to the mountain fold that they were running on. It also means that I will be able to run my fingers around, again, in that thumb up right hand, curl fingers direction, also known as counterclockwise. And so I can use, so this property of the twist stays the same whether I flip it to the front or the back. You can still run your finger around the same way. The mountains still go around the same way. So all of this to say that this twist is exactly the same as the crease pattern twist right here. So I can use it as a guide. And I can say, well, in this twist, and I'm not going to pay too much attention to whether the paper is oriented this way or that way. I'm not going to deal with that because I can just rotate my grid. My grid is 6-fold rotationally symmetric. It doesn't matter how I place this around the center. The first thing I'm going to look for is the center of my grid. So on here, I'm going to fold my paper in half in one direction, so corner to opposite corner. I'll zoom out for you there. And then I will bring one corner to the opposite. So I'm folding through another corner to find the center of my tessellation. And since this is a practice piece, I'm going to go ahead and mark on the paper. So then I want to copy what I have here, which is the same as what's in the crease pattern. And so I will be going out one spacing and have mountains in these grid lines. And I will do that 3-fold rotationally symmetric around. And I'm just kind of generally gesturing at this. This in the crease pattern would be these valleys that are passing one from the center. Or I should say the extensions of the valleys are passing one from the center. Our next pleats pass 2 from the center. And so in these other directions, I can put in other mountains going 2 from the center. And then I need to differentiate between which ones are double depth and which ones are single depth. So my pleats going 1 from the center, these that I gestured at earlier, are double depth. And so their valley will be 2 spacings away. And I can mark that for all 3 of these pleats. And then for my pleats that are 1 grid spacing away from the center, my pleats that are 2 spacings away, my valley will be 1 further. Okay, so once I've got my pleats in the proper locations, I can go ahead and start folding my twist. I can bring up my paper and say, okay, I'm gonna need this mountain, and it's gonna have that valley, and I'm gonna go around and add on top of what I already have. I don't want to be digging out from underneath. And as I go around, I'm going to start to notice some patterns in what I'm putting in. Specifically, so this is, technically speaking, a open 3-fold mixed depth hexagon twist. And so I'm going to get that 1 in, 1 out on the single depth pleat. I'm going to get 2 in, 2 out. So it's even, but 2 in, 2 out on the double depth pleat. And this is going to be a repeating pattern all the way around. This is what we're going to be looking for when we're folding twists outside of the central twist. So our pattern here is 1 in, 1 out, 2 in, 2 out, and then it repeats 1 in, 1 out, 2 in, 2 out, 1 in, 1 out, 2 in, 2 out. Once we have our extensions of the pleats firmly on grid lines and flat on the paper, on the desk, we can start squashing. And here we have kind of an intermediate squash state where the twist is much flatter and it's not pulling on the pleats so much anymore. We can go ahead and squash. The next thing to do is we're going to flip back to the front side, and notice we've got this characteristic triangle outline, and we're going to figure out which pleats are which. So here I'm grabbing the double depth pleats and going to align those with my crease pattern. So this mountain fold is this mountain here. Next, I'm going to fold my double depth triangle, and I need the crease pattern so I can count from the place where the mountain fold starts down here in the pocket to the center of that triangle. And that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spacings. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 right here. So for remembering that for later, it's going to be 1 past the corner of the triangle hole. And what I'm going to do there, it's a closed double depth triangle twist. So I'm going to do like I would for any other closed twist. Put the mountains, split the mountain at our point of interest. And this time, instead of a single depth twist, it's going to be double depth. And then we can squash. And you'll notice now that I have a little chink cut out of my triangle hole. And this is going to be something that we see repeated over and over because we have this twist in 3 identical positions around our central hexagon. Okay, so what's next? Well, I need to find the position of my single depth triangle. Usually in this hexagons and triangles tiling, we just need to find one triangle and then we're golden. But with this one, we need to find the second triangle as well. And that's going to be at 1, 2, 3, 4 spacings out from where that one hits the corner of the hexagon twist. And so I can go 1, 2, 3, 4 out to here. And again, split my pleat at that location. And fold my closed triangle twist. So that's as much information as we need from the crease pattern. I'm going to go ahead and shift back to the full desk view. And by the way, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them in the chat, or if you're watching the replay, drop them in the comments, and I make sure to answer as quickly as possible. So from here, I've got a pleat overlap. And when we have pleat overlaps, I like to go ahead and resolve them. In this particular case, I'm kind of ambivalent about that because I am going to be flipping the paper over to resolve that overlap. And I don't think it's super crucial to resolve it while we're still putting in the triangle twists. So let's leave that one for a moment and continue on with our triangles. So let's continue with another closed single depth triangle on this pleat. So I'm going to carry on this way because I noticed that this overlap is going to be harder to open on the other side. This is something that I teach elsewhere. Just experiment with it for yourself and see what I mean. So we saw with this one that 2 spacings after the corner of the triangle hole, we get the center of our next single depth closed triangle. That'll be right here. And now, am I surprised that this is going to cut through the double depth triangle? Actually, no, because I can see that this pleat is going to cut through that corner anyways. So I'm not surprised by this, and I'm just going to let it fold in. And this won't add any new grid lines because there's already a grid line there in the triangle. Now we're going to squash our small triangle. Then, like we saw earlier, our center is 1 spacing past the intersection for our double depth triangle. I'm going to grab that grid intersection. And I can double check that I'm in the right location by seeing, okay, this pleat is coming 1 spacing out from the small triangle. Here it's coming 1 spacing out from the small triangle. We're good. And I'm going to continue around with the same technique. The other way that I can reference my folds here is I'm noticing that I'm getting tubes. They're weird lopsided tubes, but I am getting mountains coming to mountains. And I'm getting that with both sets of these triangle twists. So once we find the locations from the crease pattern, then we can use those locations to find other references. Like I know I need to cut through the tip of this triangle. I know I need to form a tube. I know my center is going to be 2 spacings out from this corner. And there's just so many different options when it comes to referencing where your twists need to go. With this final triangle, I do have a pleat overlap in here, And I'm noticing by pinching the paper that I've got some extra thickness, but it starts 2 spacings out from my grid intersection. That's the center of the triangle. So I'm not going to worry about it because it's not going to get pulled into the twist itself. So now I've got all of my triangle twists, and I'm going to flip over to the other side. And when I flip over, I'm not really paying attention to how I'm flipping. This might seem strange to people because normally people flip like either horizontally or vertically, but I'm just flipping over and finding a pleat overlap. So if you want a reference, have a flat edge on top of your central hexagon. And I'm looking here and I'm seeing, okay, this pleat that's coming in on top is double depth. That means it's going to need to go 2 in, 2 out to hit the next pleat. Now that next pleat is going to need to go 1 in, 1 out before it hits the next pleat. And that's really what I'm keying off of. So the next one goes 2 in, 2 out. Next pleat, 1 in, 1 out, then 2 in, 2 out, and finally get everything settled. And I can make the paper happier by squishing it down a little bit more. Just checking everywhere that I have everything on grid lines, and then I can squash this twist. So that's the first twist squashed. I'm going to continue around this way, somewhat arbitrarily. And this time, my top pleat coming in is a single depth pleat. So I'm going to need to go 1 in, 1 out. And I can know then, because I identified where it's going 1 in, 1 out, that the valley of my next pleat needs to come to the start of that location. Because this is going 1 in, 1 out. That's going to be a corner. I need to have a valley there. This valley is going to go and meet a valley from the neighboring pleats. Notice I ran this valley through the mountain that was previously here. Then these are going to combine and run out in a 3-way intersection together from the other side. And the thing to notice with these is that they're all double depth. So I'm doing a triangle wrap, and my mountains here are coming in, and I get another 3-way intersection on top of the triangle wrap. And that can go ahead and squish down. It's not going to stay down all the way while you manipulate other things, but it's good to have the pleats in order so that when I, for example, come in, 2 out, put in a pleat in another direction, it doesn't totally pop out. And then 1 in, 1 out, another pleat, double depth here, and then we get a pleat stacking on top of our wrap there. So as you can see, it's a little wobbly here, so I'm going to poke my 2 in, 2 outs to make them effectively twice 1 in, 1 out, and then squash the rest of the way once my pleats are secure. Again, here I could go to the other side and resolve that triangle twist, but I'm going to stay working on the same side of the paper for as long as I can. Rotating once more. Now I have a double depth pleat again. These are alternating back and forth as I go around. And I locate my 2 out so I can find my 2 in, so I can identify my valley running out, which will cross this mountain and meet the valley on the far side. So it's meeting this valley and they're going to go off together in a 3-way intersection and cause a triangle wrap. From there, I can continue around in either direction really and go around setting up my new my new pleats around this 3-fold hybrid mixed depth hexagon. There's all kinds of hexagon twists, so if you catch me saying hybrid instead of mixed depth, that's because you can do pretty much the same things with hybrids, merging between the closed and the open hexagon as you can with these mixed depth options. So once I've got those pleats up, I'm going to poke it a bit so it lays flatter and then squash it all the way. Again, I'm leaving a triangle wrap behind that I will deal with after I flip to the other side. Continuing, we get the same thing again. We're going to have this time a single depth pleat. So I find where the 1 in is or find the 1 out to find the 1 in, which lets me find my valley. And again, we've got these tubes going on everywhere. So I can see already that these 2 spacings are going to match the double depth pleat that's going to go in here. And I'm going to get a corner of my new twist matching up with the corners of the existing twist. Again, I'm going to open up and let the valley run through all the way to the next valley, where it will combine and run off into that combined direction. And then I can reach under here and pull out my remaining pleats. I don't have to keep a hold of the wrap the whole time. It can come partially open and still maintain some structural integrity. And then I can apply my algorithm of 1 in, 1 out, then 2 in, 2 out, and repeat until I'm all the way around the twist. And I can flatten it slightly, make sure all of my pleats are secure, then squash my twist. So one thing I didn't mention so much earlier when I picked which pleat overlap to go for first is that these 2 pleat overlaps are in the more difficult orientation. These 4 were easier. So if your paper was not exactly like mine, then you probably started in a slightly different location around the central twist. And that's not really a problem. It's just a difference in how the paper is layered when you get to it, but you're going to do the same thing in either case. So here, when I open up the pleat overlap, I need to really dig the paper out. I need to be careful that I'm not undoing any of my triangle twists from the other side. And I also need to make sure that I've got the mountains coming from the back side connecting together directly without any pleats getting in the way. So for this go around, I'm actually going to show a slight variation So I've got these pleats. I can see the 2 out, which means I can find my 2 in, which means I can find my wrap. But what I'm going to do first is I've got this 1 in, 1 out. I'm going to go ahead and put that pleat in because it's going to make the paper much more stable and it won't be looking like I'm undoing as much when I put this pleat in later after I have the wrap. So I'm doing it first before the wrap so I don't have to do it after the wrap. So I'm going to find that location where I've got the 2 in, 2 out, run my valley out here, do my triangle wrap, and then I've just got this short pleat with no overlaps in it. And so these 2 short pleats to do, and it's not as messy as when I had the long pleat left after the wrap. So we can get that hexagon twist down. And we've got one more hexagon twist to go. And again, these are 3-fold mixed depth hexagon twists. I'm just calling them hexagon twists for short because they're the only hexagon twists in this pattern. So notice as I'm opening this pleat overlap, I'm making sure that I'm free from the overlap on the outside. Then I'm popping the pleat in. I'm making sure not to pop this corner of the triangle. And I can see here I've got a single depth pleat going into a double depth pleat. I've got that 1 in, 1 out, which means the next one needs to go 2 in, 2 out before the next pleat. And this is running into the hexagon twist we already have, except that I'm not going to let it get past this pleat. I'm going to run it under the pleat, then wrap the overlying pleat around and lock that in place. Next, I'm going to find my valley that goes through here. And notice that this pleat is kind of opened up already. I've got the 1 out, 1 in, which means that my valley is coming out on this grid line. I'm going to pop down the mountain, let the valley run all the way through to the valley on the far side of the mountain. And make sure this shows up as a double depth triangle wrap. Then I can bring in my remaining 2 pleats and set up this mixed depth 3-fold hexagon. And squash all the way down. And from here, we're done with the hard part. From here, we're just going to flip over. I'll zoom out slightly. And we've got all of these triangle wraps, 6 of them specifically, and they need to be opened out into their triangle twists. So I'm going to grab this twist, or this wrap rather. It's a double depth wrap. I know that for 2 reasons. I can see that the pleat goes 2 grid spacings, and I can also see it's next to a single depth triangle. So these triangles are going to alternate just like the pleats around the hexagon alternate in depth. So I'm going to take this mountain fold, I'm going to keep that mountain fold, and I'm going to put the valley 2 spacings on the other side. And squash my twist. Then I'll rotate to the next triangle wrap. This one is single depth. So I'm just going to put the valley 1 spacing on the far side of the mountain. In Ben Parker's terminology, that would be the shadow valley. And I'm going to go around and do the same thing with each of these triangle wraps. And we'll go all the way around. And that's the whole tessellation. Now I don't have any pleat overlaps left, and I'm at a tiling break. So this is my mixed depth jewels pattern, and the repeats of this pattern are aligned with the grid when it's aligned with the edge of the hexagon, which is the standard way to fold the triangle grid on a hexagon. So I hope you learned a lot about mixed depth twists. So mixed depth is a whole category. It doesn't just apply to hexagons. We've got the threefold mixed depth hexagon that we use today. There's also twofold mixed depth hexagons. You can see this one is 1, 1, 2, and this one is 2, 2, 1. And any twist shape that has a number of pleats that is not prime, so anything but an equilateral triangle, can be modified to be mixed depth. You can do this with rhombi, with squares. There's just a ton of possibilities, and I talk a lot more about that inside of Advanced Twist Techniques. So check out the link below if you want to learn even more and get access to a ton of crease patterns using mixed depth twists, hybrid twists, extended symmetries, all of these fun things that I've been learning about and discovering over the last year. So happy folding, everyone.